Belle Ribeiro Addy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As we know, Section 35 had to be triggered, and that's caused a lot of controversy since. So what attempts were made in terms of the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill? What attempts have been made, or were made rather, during the passage of the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill to avoid reaching a point where Section 35 had to be triggered?
Well, we had conversations with Scottish ministers, but the template of interaction when bills are going through is that we in Westminster don't interfere. So there's a limited scope for how much you can do without getting in the way. We believe in a devolution, and we could see that there were very clear attempts from within the Scottish Parliament, across all parties, to try and look at issues that were raised about the bill and how it would impact the general UK settlement on the Gender Recognition Act. And that should have been sufficient. We saw many amendments which would have been quite helpful, all rejected. And I had a call with Shona Robinson. I know the Secretary of State for Scotland also had calls with his counterparts, where we expressed concerns about policy in general terms. But in terms of trying to intervene to stop it getting to a Section 35, that is a responsibility for the Scottish Government, not for us.
And have you been able to have any conversations with anyone in the Scottish Government since about how they could move forward with gender recognition reform?
Well, given that they've threatened legal action, any possible thing I do could end up being relevant to a legal case. So it's up to them to reach out, and we haven't had any representations on looking at the bill. So that if they want to amend the bill, they've got plenty of time. There's no time limit to that. I think if they want to challenge the Section 35, there is a time limit. But in terms of amending the bill, I think that the debate around this issue has been extensive enough that they will know what needs to be done, and that's really making sure that the safeguarding elements, especially as they impact on the Equality Act, which they do, as we put in the Statement of Reasons, that those issues are addressed.
Thank you. And do you think that triggering Section 35 undermines the Scottish Government's autonomy to draft legislation on LGBTQ plus issues and trans issues?
No, I don't actually. The Section 35 is part of the Scotland Act, so it was something that was devised along with Scottish members of Parliament across all parties. It's part of the devolution settlement, and it is a break that's never been used before. This was quite a significant intervention, but it's been clear since that intervention that the public opinion is on the side of the UK government, not the Scottish government.
And how are you measuring that?
I think it's been pretty obvious. There have been surveys. There have been, I think, as we can see from even the reactions that they're having during their leadership contest, which I won't go into, that's not my business, but it is very evident that public opinion is on the side of the UK government. And I think it'll become more evident whether we see a challenge to the Section 35 or not.
Okay. Can I just ask on that, should the use of Section 35 be driven by public opinion or by legal necessity?
It should be driven by legal necessity. Of course it should be. But the justification for Section 35 was not public opinion. That's just a follow-up point.
I thought you'd just given us the
No,
impression
that's absolutely not what I said.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. And earlier this year, you stated that the government plans to update the list of countries from which the UK will accept gender recognition certificates. Could you give us an update on this?
I believe that we are publishing essays on some of the countries where we believe that their standards in terms of what they're doing on self-identification no longer match UK standards. I don't have the date for when the essays will be published because we want to make sure we get this absolutely right. And the last thing we want to do is alarm people or give the impression which many opponents of the government and activists want to give, which is that we're rolling back trans rights. What we are doing is maintaining the status quo.
I want to move on to some questions about conversion practices legislation. Does the government have any plans to introduce a legislative ban on conversion therapy?
Yes, we do. We've stated multiple times that we do intend to bring in a legislative ban on conversion, and we call it conversion practices because it's not therapy.
Okay, no, I agree with that, thank you. And when do you plan to publish this bill to ban it?
In due course, I think is the easiest way to describe it. We have decided that we're going down the pre-legislative scrutiny route. That was a matter of debate on whether having that would prolong the process. But looking at how contentious the issue has been in terms of how it's discussed, and also looking at the strength of feeling across both houses of Parliament and on both sides of the argument, we felt that just having the PLS process would make the bill a lot more rigorous. But that's no longer in control of government in terms of the timetable for that. But we will publish a draft bill for them.
And do we expect this before the next general election?
Yes,
wherever it might be?
yes. That's something that we've committed to. It's just certainly something that I want to see.
In your response to our chair regarding the status on draft legislation to ban conversion practices, you've previously said that difficult issues that are not fully resolved are preventing the government from publishing this draft. Could you elaborate on some what those difficult issues are, because they might give us an insight as to why it may take longer?
It's a lot of the evidence that received from clinicians around, and some of what we've seen from the CAS review around the safeguarding of young children and the definitions. This is one of the reasons why we've gone with practices rather than therapy, and what is likely to be in scope, particularly from a medical standpoint.
And given that it's now been 5 years since the plans to ban conversion practices, and the bill hasn't been drafted as yet.
It's currently being drafted, and I'm happy with the progress, but I don't want to give a date which will only disappoint. It has to be as good as it possibly can be and cover all the elements that we want covered before we publish.
I'm just worried about, I suppose, what message of the delay might send to the LGBTQ plus community, and I wonder what the government were doing to mitigate that message.
I think the message we're sending is that we're doing this properly, that this isn't virtue signalling, fly-by-night legislation that will create problems, in particularly for that community of people. They need robust legislation, and they need the issue to be closed once we've finished. We can't continue litigating this over and over again, and I think that that's what they can have confidence in, that we're doing this properly.
Thank you. That's all from me, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just pick up a couple of points? So the intention was for there to be draft legislation by spring 2022. And I think it was in January we were told that the draft bill would be published shortly, and in March in due course. Is in due course longer than shortly?
No. In
Okay,
due course.
fine.
In due course for me means it's coming.
It means shortly.
I'm pleased with the progress, but I can't speak for what previous ministers
No,
and
I'm not asking you to speak
I
for
can
previous
only tell you what I intend to
ministers.
do.
And the message last time was as soon as parliamentary time allows. Have you asked for the parliamentary time for this legislation?
We're making a bid.
So you haven't? You're making a bid?
We're making a bid, and the business managers are aware of the fact that a bid is going to be necessary for the 4th session. However, without the draft bill, which is why the draft bill coming imminently is important, it's very hard to bid properly for the amount of time without them seeing that.
And can I just be absolutely specific? The bid is going to come from the GEO and not from the Equality Hub, and not from any other government department.
No, not that I'm. That's certainly not my intention. I'm the one who owns the process.
And no other government department has asked for the time for this legislation.
No, unless you're referring to business and trade, but which I also cover. But this is something that's coming as
From
equality
the Equality
legislation.
Hub.
Yes.
Fine. Thank you for that. Next, we have Carolyn Harris, please.